Welcome to the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael, and today I have a special guest. He was a former 11-year veteran in the NBA playing for the Buffalo Braves, New York Knicks, Atlanta Hawks, and Washington Bullets. He also was a Rhodes Scholar and a congressman. He's currently the CEO and president of Lead One. I have Tom McMillen with me.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing good today. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it.
No, happy to do it.
All right. Okay, so I guess we'll get right into it. So you were born in Mansfield, Pennsylvania, or you lived there growing up. What
Yes.
to people who don't know about Mansfield, Pennsylvania, how would you describe that town?
Well, when I was growing up in a very small town, it's what I call one traffic light town. What very it was a very small town. The only thing that really made it different was we had a state college there, which is now University Mansfield University, and so we had a lot of university personnel, college personnel that lived in the town. So the town was a couple thousand people. But because of the school, the university, two things. One is that we had a great group of teachers in my high school because it was a teachers college. So we had a great teachers growing up. And the second thing, they had a pretty good sports program on basketball. So I was able to go up and play against college players when I was in junior high school, and that was also very beneficial. Most times you grow up in small towns, you don't have those opportunities, but that was particularly helpful for me.
And you were one of five kids. You were the youngest. How did you get connected with the game of basketball?
I was the second youngest,
Oh, second
actually. I
youngest?
was
Oh,
sister.
sorry.
Yeah. My father played a little basketball, but his brother was a very good player at Syracuse, played in the pros a little bit, was tragically killed in a car accident, but his family was very, very big into basketball. And my older brother was a very successful basketball player. Went on to play at the University of Maryland, was a high school all-stater and all ACC player at Maryland. Then he was drafted into the pros and actually went overseas to play. So my brother, who was 6 years older than me, really was the pioneer, if you will.
Yeah, so I read also that growing up you had a bone problem. I was wondering like what happened growing up that, maybe was some kind of adversity for you as a kid, like trying to develop and like play basketball. What happened with your bones? Was there anything that happened?
Well, I was growing very quickly, and my bone structure was sort of out of sync, and they had to put braces on my knees. I had to wear them at night. And really, the doctor never thought that I would be able to play sports. Matter of fact, our orthopedist surgeon said that, I really wouldn't be athletic as a result of it. But I wore those braces for a number of years and, eventually grew into it or outgrew it, whichever expression fits. And, started playing basketball very early. So, don't always listen to your doctors, I guess.
And so, in high school, you were a really dominant player. From you averaged 47.7 points per game, shot 76% from the floor. You scored 50 or more points 17 different times. You also had 67 points as a career high in just 19 minutes in a game. Well, for you growing up, how how did your high school career work out where you became such a dominant player? Did you start off in high school sort of just feeling your way out, or did it just like immediately you were successful at basketball in high school?
Well, truthfully, because of my brother, who was 6 years older, and then my other brother, who was between my older brother and myself, was athletic as well. So I had the familial influences. Um, and, my older brother, Jay, kind of paved the way. I grew up, um, I was quite tall. I was 6 feet when I was in sixth grade and 6'4" when I was in eighth grade. So I was tall and had a family that, was very much into basketball. So, I mean, those things kind of all worked together. One of the things that happened to me, which I got a lot of national attention for a little small town in Pennsylvania, was that because my brother played in the ACC and was well known, I worked in a lot of camps in the summers. A lot of people got to know me through my brother, which, they started recruiting me literally when I was in 10th grade. And so all that was a big influence.
Oh wow. So that's a lot to take in, especially at such a young age. People recruiting you and wanting to go after you. And in the February 16th, 1970 edition of Sports Illustrated, you were named the best high school player in America. How did you handle all of that attention that probably comes with that, being in a small town, probably, TV stations, journalists, reporters coming to speak to you? What was that like? Was it sort of a culture shock to have all of this attention
It
come to
was,
you?
I only had 80 kids in my senior high school in
Yeah.
my class, and so very small town. And here we had national reporters and recruiters coming to our town, and I mean, we had hundreds of schools recruiting me, and we had national television networks and Sports Illustrated. Being the second high school player ever on the cover of Sports Illustrated was just created a meltdown. I mean, you understand it a little bit better today with social media and all that, but back then, Sports Illustrated was really a big thing, and to be on the cover of it certainly led to just extraordinary attention, and it just exacerbated the whole recruiting process.
Was there anything crazy that happened, like in terms of just sort of something that you didn't expect? Outside of just the general, like a lot of reporters, a lot of recruiters, was there anything that ever sort of stood out to you from that time period?
Well, I mean, I remember that it was extraordinarily difficult recruiting because my brother Jay was at Maryland, wanted me to go to Maryland. My brother Paul was at Carolina, wanted me to go to Carolina. My sister was at the University of Pennsylvania, was really wanted me to go to Penn. The coach of Virginia had coached in my hometown and was well known to my family. So it was deep roots in each of these schools that made a decision very difficult. So literally, I didn't make a decision to go to Maryland till literally hours before I had to be at Maryland registering on the final day of classes. So I often tell people I packed for college, not knowing which college I was going to go to, because it was so chaotic and my family got so involved in it, and it was not an easy decision.
Yeah, it sounds like a really tough one. So you were also valedictorian of your high school. What I mean, I guess for me, like, I could never imagine like being able to be top of my class, but also being a world class basketball player in high school. How did you balance both of them, which when there's so much required in terms of work and effort on both sides?
Well, I was fortunate that my high school coach was also my chemistry teacher, and very good chemistry teacher, and he got me interested in chemistry. I went on to major in chemistry at Maryland, which is no easy task because of the labs and everything, and the amount of time it takes. But my parents were both college educated. They really put high emphasis on getting an education, and so it was in my DNA, if you will, to study and get a good education, as my brothers all and sisters all did. So I just was someone who just studied very hard and worked at it. But the way you do that, I had two things I focused on when I was growing up, which was playing basketball and being a good student. And I didn't. I just kind of really focused on those two things, and it was a crazy time. Not only excelling in school, but also I was student government president too. So it wasn't like I was not. I was in the band. I did a lot of things besides just play basketball and go to school.
Yeah. And when you end up going to Maryland, like you mentioned, your brother Jay was a a big time player for the school. Did did you get a chance to go on campus, maybe even before the recruitment process and get to maybe experience college life and see what the whole deal was, what it's like to be a basketball player for Maryland, just from, getting to see what your brother was experiencing?
Well, absolutely. And when my brother was a freshman at Maryland, it would have been 1963, and I would have been 11 years old. So I started coming to Maryland, between 11 and when I was 13, 14, 15 years old. I would watch games there. So I got very much understood everything about Maryland, College Park, and so forth. So that was a big plus, having him sort of trailblaze before me.
And so you were, a great player at Maryland. You played for Lefty Driesell. I always say like his speech at the Hall of Fame was probably one of the best I've ever heard. It was really funny, really interesting too. For like what was he like on a day-to-day basis as your coach, and just in your his presence in your life?
Well, originally I had committed to Carolina, and I really changed my mind at the end to go to Maryland. And a lot of it was due to Coach Driesell and the fact that he sold a concept, and the concept was you go to Carolina be another All-American, or you come to Maryland and be the All-American. And it made sense to me because you can either perpetuate a tradition or make a tradition. And Lefty was right. College basketball in the Washington area was really non-existent before he got to Maryland. And he put Maryland on the map. You had great professional figures like Vince Lombardi and George Allen and Ted Williams. And Lefty was right there with them, but representing the whole college space. So he had a tremendous momentum for the program because of who he was. And so that was very attractive to me. The other thing, I always had a political interest, and I had been appointed by President Nixon as the youngest presidential appointee ever. I think that still holds today. 17 years old, I was appointed to the President's Council on Physical Fitness. So that gave me the opportunity to go to the White House and go to meetings with high-level officials and so forth, meet the president. And being at Maryland was just made that so much more convenient. That was another reason that it made sense for me to do that. And but in the long run, Maryland worked out very well for me. I was able to achieve a lot in basketball, achieve a lot academically, win a Rhodes Scholarship, and really set a stage for me eventually to go into politics.
And you actually, Lefty said in a story that I found on Slam online that he always had new players write down their goals on an index card. And you wrote that you wanted to be a Rhodes Scholar and an All-American. And he said that he tried to convince you to become president of the student body instead. It seems like from the beginning you had your goal set and focus on what you wanted to do, and you had a straight line path in terms of your thought process, goals that you wanted to achieve and how you were going to get there. Where does that come from, like where at that early stage you're predicting that, or not predicting that, but it's a goal you want to accomplish, and eventually you do get you're able to achieve that. Where does that come from?
Well, back to your story, Lefty thought being a Rhodes Scholar and basketball player was doable because he had a player at Davidson who did it, and so he's really the only coach ever who coached 2 Rhodes Scholars. So he did
Oh,
actually encourage me to run for student government president in Maryland, but that was such an encompassing job that I could never have done it. He was very encouraging of me doing things and being active, and it was one of the good things about Lefty. It was hard for him when I was a chemistry major. I would show up for practice a few minutes late, but he went along with it, and the whole goal setting thing really was part of my life from the very beginning. I read a lot of the motivation books that kids read, Think and Grow Rich and all those kind of books, and I really inculcate a lot of those values of setting your plan and planning your work and working your plan, those kinds of things. And it was very important to me. Every day I tried to plan my day, use it efficiently, and those traits kind of carry over even till today. It's part of living wisely, if you will. And those were inculcated very early in my life.
and on the basketball side, through your time at Maryland, you averaged 20 and a half points a game, 9.8 rebounds a game. You were the MVP of the 1972 NIT that Maryland won in your sophomore year, and then in your junior year, the team went to the Elite Eight. And you formed a really nice duo with Len Elmore. What was it like sort of playing in Maryland, and what did you enjoy the most out of just that situation, playing there at that time?
I would say the only negative at Maryland was that Maryland was uh, in a conference, the ACC, which is a great conference, but it was very North Carolina-centric conference. And so we ended up having to play a lot of games there. And you didn't have the bye system today where if you lose, you still have another chance. Matter of fact, when Maryland won the national championship, they had actually lost the ACC tournament and went on to win it. So we had that really unusual situation where if you didn't win the conference, and the ACC was a very tough conference, you didn't go on. And remember back then, there were only 25 teams in the NCAA and 16 in the NIT. So between the two tournaments, there was only a little over 40 teams. And contrast that with today, where you have 65 teams in the NCAA tournament. And as a result of that, I think winning the NIT was a much bigger deal back then because the teams were so far and few. And the one tragedy for us is that we didn't get second chances like kids to have today to go on and win a national championship. We were good enough. We lost to UCLA at one point, Pauley Pavilion. They hadn't lost a game in 70-some games. And in my senior year, and we lost to North Carolina State triple overtime my senior year, and they went on to win the national title. So as a result of that, the rules of college sports changed. They created the whole bye system as a result of that because Maryland was too good not to have a second chance. And if nothing else, we paved the way for a lot of kids to have a chance to play in the March Madness that they wouldn't have had to play if those rules weren't changed.
Yeah. So, another topic is that, in 1972, you played on the Olympic team, famously the situation where you guys ended up losing. From that situation, what do you remember and just sort of at that time, just how that situation played out?
It was a tumultuous Olympics. Of course, the Israeli massacre occurred 5 days before our final game against the Soviet Union, and it created tremendous feeling across the village that maybe these games shouldn't go on. To see Israeli athletes literally being murdered in and outside the village was just mind-blowing. Then we get to our basketball game, and we were young. We were 18, 19-year-old kids, 20-year-old kids playing against professionals, Soviet players who were 28, 29, 30, really 10 years older than us and mature and everything. And they were part of the professional system in the Soviet Union. And yet we still came from behind and won that game, except for the fact that the referee just kept replaying the last play until the Soviets finally prevailed. But it was a tumultuous Olympics, something I really never can forget. Again, because of that game, the rules changed. That's what happened when years later they have to open up the Olympic basketball to the dream team. And again, I think that sets the stage for a whole different Olympic basketball effort, and it really emanated from that 72 game.
And so, moving on, the 1974, you were drafted twice. You were drafted in the NBA draft by the Buffalo Braves. In the first round, you're a ninth pick, and then you were also drafted by the Virginia Squires in the first round of the ABA draft. You ended up going to Oxford, for studying for the Rhodes Scholar. So you ended up playing in Italy on the weekends, while you were studying throughout the week. What was that like, first moving to a new place, moving to Europe, and also just sort of the high school situation in college, balancing your studies while also, you're playing professionally too.
Well, I thought it was hard to balance it in college. It was really hard to balance it in two different continents. Matter of fact, I played oftentimes 2 times a week in Italy, and I would leave class, fly down to Italy, and I would play a game at night, and then I would drive. I would be driven to Rome Airport 4 or 5 hours away, catch a 5 o'clock plane in the morning. I'd be back at Oxford by breakfast time the next morning. And I did that twice a week, and I played 50-some games in Italy, and it was extraordinarily difficult. As I said, balancing school and sports is very difficult at the university level. Doing it do 2 different continents was no easy task. And yet I did it. And we ended up, I would fly to Berlin for a game, or I'd fly to France for a game, or Israel, or even Russia. So it was a great experience. And I kept my basketball skills up. And I was able to maintain my Oxford studies. But what happened was I ended up having to come back from Oxford before the end of my second year. The program's a 2-year program, because my lawyer thought that the merger of the ABA and NBA would really hurt me, not having 2 teams to bargain against. And so I told him I didn't really want to come back. I want to give up my Rhodes Scholarship because I wanted to finish it. And I ended up making an arrangement with the Rhodes folks that allowed me to come back in the summers and finish my Rhodes Scholarship in 3 summer terms. So I did come back, played in the NBA, and then right when the season was over, I'd fly to Oxford. And I did that for 3 straight years, and I took my exams and passed. So it took me 4 years to finish at Oxford as opposed to the usual 2, but it allowed me to come back to the NBA.
Oh wow, that's a that's a really interesting story. So in when you
But what was interesting about it was when I went to the Rhodes people initially, they told me absolutely not, that you cannot do this, and so I was really chagrined. And then I found out that Cecil Rhodes, the man that the Rhodes created the Rhodes Scholarship and funded it, had gone to Oxford only in the summer terms. And so I took it to the Rhodes and Oxford people and said, look, our founder only went to Oxford in the summer terms. How can you stop me from doing that? And they gave me permission as a result of that. So.
Oh wow. So that means that, that's a lot of flying back work and whatnot. What was your transition to the NBA like from, playing overseas you went to the Buffalo Braves. What was that transition moving on to the NBA like?
It
Was
was a tough. I don't think I really caught on to the NBA until it was really. My first year was tough. I was with the Buffalo Braves, very experienced team. Um, I didn't really catch on that well in the beginning. I was traded to New York. I started playing a lot better in New York. Again, another veteran team. Played with Bill Bradley his last year. And then I got traded to Atlanta, and I think that's where I really blossomed as a player.
And so, like you mentioned, you played briefly with Buffalo, and you were traded in the Bob McAdoo deal. And it was interesting, like sort of reading about that trade at the time, and sort of just how how you felt about it. Like I saw a quote that you said a pro athlete is a puppet in a puppeteer's world. I try to do what I can within that framework, which I thought was really a really interesting comment, and sort of just for you as a essentially as a throw in the trade, because the trade was more about Bob McAdoo was an MVP and an All Star at that time. What was it like for you, that adjustment of having to sort of you're drafted, you sign a contract with the Braves, and then all of a sudden you're traded. What was that experience like? Being traded for the first time.
Well, Buffalo was owned by a friend of my family's who had grown up in Mansfield, the town I grew up in. As a matter of fact, my father was the dentist for Paul Snyder's family, who owned the Braves. So it was there was a close connection there. But I, quite frankly, didn't play that well in Buffalo, and I had gotten hurt. I broke my nose, and moving on to New York was really quite a great experience. I had guarded Bob McAdoo in practice for while I was at Buffalo, and so going to New York with him made it very comfortable. And playing with Bradley his last year was fun, with Earl Monroe and all the great players, Walt Frazier. It was an experience playing in New York. I'm glad I had that experience. And I played. It wasn't a great team, but I played fairly well. And then was traded to Atlanta the next year, and didn't know much about Atlanta, but here I had played for my hometown owner, and then I'd gone to New York, played with Bradley. Now I was being traded to go play with Ted Turner in Atlanta, who I didn't really know. And Jimmy Carter had literally just been elected president, so Atlanta was really on the map. And it was a great experience. My 6 years in Atlanta were fabulous, and oftentimes trades allow you to develop as a player, and they did for me as well. Oftentimes you're traded, and the next day you go to the next city, and you never come back to your house again. Moving company comes in, packs you up, and you're gone. But that's how it is. And all the trades that I was involved in, from going from Buffalo to New York to Atlanta, were just fabulous. And then, of course, back to Washington was a trade that I asked Ted Turner to make. In 1983, I went to him, or even earlier. I said, Ted, I love playing for you in Atlanta, but I'd love to go to Washington because I'd like to run for Congress up there. And lo and behold, he traded me to Washington. So it was, as I say, it was the first political trade in professional sports.
Oh wow! What was Ted Turner's reaction when you first told him that you were interested in A, running for Congress, but also B, like that you wanted a trade? How did he take that initially, like when you first told him?
Well, he was very supportive. We oftentimes talk politics, exchange books. He came on the road trips, and I gave him books to read. One time I gave a book called The Crash of '79 by Paul Erdman. He read it, went out and bought a lot of land. So we had that intellectual discussions, and he wanted me to. So I don't think he was surprised at all when I mentioned it to him. He had helped me on some fundraising and other things, and so it was not an unnatural request. I didn't think anything would happen with it, but then he went ahead and did it. He ended up trading me to Washington. So I played 3 years in Washington and announced for Congress. before my last season with the Washington Bullets. So I was a candidate for Congress while I was in the NBA, and no one's ever done that.
Yeah. And so in Washington, one interesting fact I found was that you won January 27th, 1985 Player of the Week in the NBA. You averaged 22.4 points for during that week. You had a career high of 37 points against Phoenix on January 26th, 15 rebounds against Dallas on January 24th. You played 48 minutes in, I think, one of the games. You played 43 minutes in another game. It was because Rick Mahorn, Jeff Ruland, and Cliff Robinson were all injured, the three front court players on the Bullets. Do you remember that week at that time, sort of just being asked to fill in, going from being a role player, playing 20, 25 minutes a game, to having to play pretty much the entire game? Do you remember that experience?
No, I remember that week very well. I mean, I'm a candidate for Congress. You have to understand that I'm an announced candidate for Congress. I'm also NBA Player of the Week. So it was pretty ironic, and it just added further attention to the whole thing.
You ended up, like you said, running for Congress towards the end of your career. That was sort of at that time. You even said during that, when you won Player of the Week, that you were thinking of retiring soon, and then it might have prolonged your career a little bit longer. What was it like, sort of stepping into the political field while also still maintaining an NBA career?
It was very challenging, as I discussed earlier about going back and forth to Italy playing basketball while I was at Oxford. Running for Congress while you're in the NBA is no easy task. But I had a great coach, Gene Shue, and he was very understanding. He like we would fly to the West Coast. At that time, you flew commercial, and we'd play a road trip on the West Coast, and we'd play our last game, let's say Saturday night in Portland, and the team would fly back the next day, but you'd miss the whole day. Well, I would go to Gene and say, Gene, do you mind if I red eye back to Washington tonight after the game? And he always would say yes. So he would let me take earlier flights, and even though I'd be tired, I could get a little campaigning in and work on it. And then at the games, I bought 20 season tickets, and I brought people to the games, union leaders, business people. And then we'd have a little reception afterwards. And I'd grab one of the players, Larry Bird or Michael Jordan, and I would take them up and say hi to a few of the folks that were there as my guests. So I used basketball in a creative way to help my campaign. But nevertheless, obviously, it was very taxing. I would practice, and then after practice, I would go try to raise money or campaign at some event. So it was a challenging year.
Yeah, well, that's a good campaign pitch. The bring Michael Jordan or Larry Bird up. That definitely would
No, I would go on the
convince some
floor and
people.
ask them before the
Yeah,
game if they would mind stopping up, and they always did it. They were great. It was really fabulous.
yeah, that's really really cool. So like you ended up winning in 1987, winning a seat in Congress. What was that experience like, just to to realize something that you had been thinking of for a long time? Like you had said, you had planned this pretty much for a while, like the Ted Turner situation, asking for a trade. What was it like to finally see it realized, that goal or dream?
It was very fulfilling. Again, I barely won on election night.
Yeah.
At 10 o'clock at night, I was declared a loser by Dan Rather, and then the votes came in from the African American areas of my district, which were one of the things I really believe, being a basketball player and playing with other African American players, that helped me politically. They felt that was a positive trait. So I won such a big majority in those districts that it put me over the top. But I was only up by 1,200 votes at 11:30 at night, and there were like thousands of absentee ballots to count. And I think there were 3,000 absentee ballots. Absentee ballots go generally go Republican in orientation. And so I was worried. And over the next 2 weeks, my lead went from 1,200 down to 424 votes. Every day it was like, water torture because I was losing leads every day. But it held on, and we won. We were the closest race in the country that year. And so I came to Congress as landslide McMillen. But I was elected freshman of my class and had a chance to really be part of a great congressional class. Nancy Pelosi actually was part of my class. She came in a few months later, but we also had some terrific members of the class, and it was a fabulous experience.
And so, you went on to, work in Congress for about 6 years. And then you also were the chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports. And, what was, so working in politics, I never got a chance to ask, what inspired you from early on in your life, maybe, or at any point, what inspired you to work in politics?
My parents were very civic minded. My father and mother were very involved in a lot of charities. And giving back was something that was part of my makeup. And I felt the opportunity to run for office was one that I could use the exposure from basketball to really create an opportunity there. Bill Bradley had done it before. I was his teammates. I saw him do it. And Bill's the one who actually told me to continue playing and play and run for Congress. If Bill had said, "Don't do that," I probably wouldn't have done it. I did it. He said very simply, "Go out and make the money for the year," and he was right. And but like Bill, I had an interest in giving back. I was a chemistry major at Maryland. When I went to Oxford, I studied British masters in politics, philosophy, and economics. So there I was studying politics and studying economics and those things. And that's, again, really piqued my interest in politics. And I had worked in the Senate when I was at Maryland. So I had that in my genes. And so I wanted to give it a shot. And I saw Bill Bradley do it, and I thought, well, the best time to do it might be right around the time that your name recognition is so high for playing professional sports.
You've moved on to other, things. You were you were appointed to the University System of Maryland's Board of Regents. Recently, right now, you're the lead. You're leading the Division 1A Athletic Directors Association, president and CEO. What has that experience been like? Where you are helping in this current environment of, I guess, college sports and athletics mixed in with education. For you, as somebody who had that, you maintained that dual role when you were a high school and college athlete. For you, what have you seen helping other, I guess, this generation or recent generations balance both sides of academics and athletics?
It's getting harder and harder. The time demands on these athletes are so great. Just to be competitive in sports today it's degrees harder than it was when I was there. That's one thing. And so to balance it today is just enormously difficult. And I know our athletic directors and the coaches work very hard. There's a lot of support systems that these kids have, but nevertheless, playing big-time college sports today is very difficult, and maintaining your grades. One of the things that's different is that kids go full-time now. They go in the summer, which is something I never did. I never took summer classes, but I think that helps a lot because it takes a lot of the pressure off players. Many of them end up graduating. There are more kids graduating today in less than 4 years in college sports than ever before. And again, I think it's because of that year-round support system. So it's fun to be engaged in something that I've been involved with my whole life. That whole Olympic ideal of sound mind and sound body. It's nice to be working in a field where that is critically important.
Yeah. I guess we'll move back to the NBA as like a final part of this. So I just wanted to ask a couple like quick hitters, quick random questions. So I wanted to go through three random teammates and just to see what you thought of them, what it was like playing with them, your experiences, on and off the court. So I'm gonna start with Buffalo. You're stopping Buffalo. Ernie DiGregorio. What was he like?
Ernie was a character, very talented player. He, I have, I remember one Ernie story when we were sitting on the bench one day, and I saw Ernie eating popcorn. I said, "That's kind of funny. How's he doing?" And some fan brought up some popcorn, but he was the one of the poster boys for big contracts. He got a contract, and he had 50,000 a year for like 20 or 30 years. But I remember, but he was very talented. And I've kept in touch with him. We've talked occasionally over the years. I played against him in college too, so he was fun to play with, fun teammate.
And on the Knicks, you played with a rookie who, averaged double figures actually his rookie season, Lonnie Shelton. For people who don't know Lonnie Shelton, what was Lonnie Shelton like?
Lonnie Schultz was a very gifted basketball player. He was a freshman, but he was a rookie, but he was very, very talented. Enjoyed playing with him that year. I don't even know how many years he played in the league, but he was that one year. He was a very talented player.
So then in Atlanta, you played with John Drew. John Drew was a big time scorer. What do you remember about John Drew?
John had a very effervescent personality. He was when he went to the basket, it was very, very hard to stop him. He could go. He was like a truck going at the basket. His life I think's been up and down. I was in Houston recently. Someone told me he's driving a cab in Houston, so I haven't seen him in years. But he had some tough goings in the NBA. I think he had some substance abuse issues, but hopefully he's doing better. Someone who saw him in Houston pointed that out to me, that he was living there and gainfully employed.
And so final stop Washington. Now you played with this guy. He was a big time scorer, had a lot of injuries towards the middle part of his career. Jeff Ruland. I could imagine that you guys had a bunch of battles in practice, both being big men.
Jeff is a terrific person. I'm very fond of Jeff. I've kept up with him over the years. He had some physical ailments, backs and so forth, as so many basketball players do. When he coached at Iona and he coached in D.C. for a while, I kept up with him. He was a fun teammate, and you want Jeff to be on your side. Same thing with Rick Mahorn. You want those guys you want to be playing with them as opposed to against them. And as I said, I've kept up with Jeff over the years, and good guy, very, very, very exceptional basketball player. He had some great skills, but injuries I think cut his career short.
Yeah, and you just brought up Rick Mahorn, so I figured I might as well ask. I mean, he was one of the most physical players of his era, or probably of NBA history. What was it like battling with him in practice? Because I know he was known for his very physical play.
It was given the fact that I would have to guard Mahorn or have to guard Ruin in practice. Those were the Bruce brothers, and they carried a lot of beef on the court. It was fun. It never was a problem, and as I said, I'm really glad to be on Rick's team, not play against him. I do keep up with Rick. I saw him last spring at the Hall of Fame, and he's doing well. And he's one of those. Although he can be scary in person with his size and so, he's a very gentle giant in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And the final player, you played with him in Buffalo and New York. You were involved in the trade with him, Bob McAdoo. He was one of the greatest scorers probably in NBA history. What was it like playing with him and also being traded with him? I could imagine you had to take a flight with him and sort of commiserate over being moved. What was that whole situation like?
Well, Bob was a terrific offensive player. I mean, he had skills that he could score on anybody. And literally, I played against him every day in practice, both in Buffalo and New York. I think New York was kind of a fun experience for him going to the Garden, as it was for me. I haven't seen Bob in years. I know he's doing very well in Miami. He's had a great career, a great life. Solid person. I like Bob very much, and he was someone that it was fun to have as a teammate.
Yeah. And so final question, looking back on just, everything, what stands out to you the most just from, the basketball, the politics, what you're doing currently? What stands out to you the most, and what memories do you think about the most from, like, your past?
That's a tough question. It just depends on the environment. Some days, obviously sports comes to the forefront. Other days, politics. It's really the combination. Going into politics is a lot like playing on a team. You have players you have to get along with. A locker room is very similar to a cloakroom. Really, to be successful, you have to get along in either endeavor. And so, when you think about sports and politics, there's a lot of similarities. So, it's not like that. It's one box here and then another box there. There's a lot of commonality. You have to deal with the press. You have to deal with pressure. All those things. And so the experience was the traits were transferable in a lot of respects.
Yeah. Okay, well, Tom, thank you so much for coming on the NBA Trades podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
No problem. Look forward to it. Look forward to hearing it. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. This has been another edition of the NBA Trades podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, we're on YouTube, and it's also on Stitcher. So you can subscribe there. You can follow me on Twitter, NBA_trades. Like the page on Facebook, NBA Trades. And yeah, check it out. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it. Thanks.